Hey everyone, welcome back to Creative Raw. My name is Chris O'Donnell and thanks for joining me for another Photoshop tutorial here. Now in this video we are going to go over my dodging and burning workflow in Photoshop. Now Photoshop provides more advanced tools and techniques, specifically luminosity masks, that you can use to control your dodging and burning at a higher quality than what is possible over in Lightroom. So I can't wait to walk you through my workflow and show you just what is possible with the advanced tools of Photoshop. Now this video is going to be your foundation. This is going to be the base 101 technique that you need to know before we move on to more advanced dodging and burning techniques. The workflow itself, it's very simple, and there are many different ways that you can use this workflow to enhance your landscape photograph. So the first thing we're going to do here is we're going to set the stage for dodging and burning in Photoshop. Like I did over in the Lightroom lesson, we're going to start with a black and white photo, and I thought it would be great to use the same photo I used in the Lightroom lesson so that you can compare the difference between a dodge and burn in Lightroom and a dodge and burn in Photoshop. Now, the specific technique I use in Photoshop is a little bit different than the standard workflow that's been going around for a few years, which is to add a 50% gray layer set to either soft light or overlay blend mode, and then use your brush tool to dodge and burn those areas. I found that to be a little bit too limiting, so I use a different method that involves color fill layers and groups. So let me show you how all of this works. Now, the key to good dodging and burning is being able to control your light and shadow without any unwanted side effects, such as muddy tones, weird color shifts, or damage to your photo from over dodging and burning. You know, when you overcook your photo and you start to get real crunchy detail and your image just looks over texturized. That's what we don't want. And Photoshop provides a great environment for this because it allows you to control the hue, saturation, luminosity, and contrast with a very high degree of accuracy, much more than the automated tools over in Lightroom can do. So the first step is to open your image up as a smart object in Photoshop, either directly over from Lightroom or from ACR. Making sure your RAW file is contained within that smart object is really important for the highest quality results, especially with dodging and burning, because you're doing a lot of tonal control. So you want to make sure you have as much detail as possible within your image. So if you're really not sure what smart objects are or need a refresher on the benefits of them, make sure to watch my smart object tutorial, which gives you an in-depth look as to what smart objects are capable of. So first, let's add a layer for our burning. Now, I separate my dodge and burn layers since I use different blend modes and colors for each, and I just find it easier to keep track of my layers when they are separate. When I have one layer with both dodging and burning on it, things can get a little bit too confusing. And it's really easy to maintain this separation in Photoshop because we have different layers and groups, so that's not going to overcomplicate my workflow. So instead of adding a 50% gray layer and doing my dodge and burning on that, which is a typical approach, I'm going to add a solid color fill layer. Go down to your adjustment layers and click on solid color. And I'm not going to select pure black, but I'm going to select a pretty dark gray. When you are burning, you want to make sure that your brightness is very low, like around 10%. And since I'm working with a black and white image, my saturation and hue are going to be set to 0. So it's not pure black, but it's pretty close to it. Now don't worry too much about selecting the exact tone or color that you want, because you can always easily come back and change this later on. So I'm going to select OK. The next step is, since I am burning, I like to use overlay blend mode for that. So I'm going to select overlay, and then I'm going to go to my layer mask, and I'm going to press Command and I to invert it to black, to hide this burning layer, and then I'll be using my brush tool to reveal it for the sky. So let's open up the brush tool, and as I went over in previous videos, you want to make sure that your flow is pretty low. I'm going to start around 10%, and the opacity, I think I'll keep that at about 50. Double check to make sure my hardness is set to 0 and we are all set. Getting a brush size that's large enough to go over the entire sky easily, but you don't want it too big because then you're going to pull too much of your trees into your burning as well. Okay, so I'm going to make sure my foreground color is set to white. Since I am painting onto the layer mask, I will need to add white to reveal it. And I'm just going to start burning the areas I want to be a little bit darker. Since I have my low flow here, I can go over areas a few times to gently build up this effect. Okay, that's one application. Now let's do another. Get a real nice tapered look to this. Maybe hit that right here. Okay, then let's work the edges a little bit more. And of course, if you overburn any areas, or if you add too much white, or rather if you're revealing too much of your burn layer, you can press X to switch the foreground and the background color. So now I'm working with black again, and I can paint over areas that I want to scale back on. Switch back to white, maybe add some more. So you can easily add and remove any dodging and burning. Okay, that's looking pretty good. Definitely building some texture back, but we can do a little bit more with this. Now, before I move on to the next adjustment, I just want to give you a quick note about that 50% gray layer that I keep talking about. You may have picked up this technique from other tutorials, and it's actually something I was recommending a few years ago when I created my first dodging and burning course. But the typical approach is to use a 50% gray layer. So you go up to Layer, New, Layer, select either soft light or overlay. Let's check overlay and then tick fill overlay with neutral color, 50% gray. So this would be your typical dodge or burn layer. Now, some photographers think that this is a special dodge and burn layer, that it interacts with your image in a different way than other layers, but it's actually not the case. It's just a regular layer filled with middle gray, set to a specific blend mode. So if I added a new layer and then went to my color picker and selected 50% gray, you can see my brightness is set to 50, hit OK, grab the paint bucket, fill it with 50% gray, then change the blend mode to either soft light or overlay, you're getting the same exact result. So it's not a special layer, it's just a layer that helps you dodge and burn in a different way. The only reason why you actually fill this layer with 50% gray is so you can see your brush work more easily. For example, if I wanted to burn some areas here with my brush tool, I'm on that 50% gray layer, and let's say I want to burn this a little bit more, you're able to see your brush stroke very easily. However, if we were using a blank layer, set to soft light, and you started burning the same exact way, unless your adjustment is very heavy, it's going to be hard to see where your dodging and burning is taking place. So that's the only reason why you fill it with 50% gray. Now, the way I do it with a solid color fill layer right here, the reason why I started using this is it's actually better for retaining a non-destructive workflow. So instead of loading the color to your brush, like in the previous example, I set my brush to black and I started painting on this 50% gray layer like this. So instead of doing that, where the color of your dodging or burning is on the same layer as your brush work. So in other words, the color is fused to your brush. You can't separate them. By using the solid fill adjustment layer, I'm actually separating the color from my brush work. The color is set with the solid color adjustment layer, and you can change this whenever you want, like so. So that's where the color is, and the actual brush work, if I will click on this layer here, is on the layer mask. So the color is separate from the brush. It's completely non-destructive. So this means that you can change the color of your dodging or burning very easily by changing the solid color here at any time in your workflow. Where over here with our 50% gray layer, let's just take a look at this layer for a second. The color we use is fused to the brushwork, so you can't really identify this brush and change the color. I mean, you could, but it's very difficult and would take a long time to do. You're actually better off to just trash this layer altogether and then repaint it with a different color, which isn't any fun either. Now, another reason why I don't use a 50% gray layer anymore, especially with a color image, is that when you use white or black brushwork to dodge and burn, you can inadvertently affect the color temperature depending on the surrounding colors. For example, when you dodge with white, it's actually warmer than your blues and your purples. If you look at the color wheel, or rather a color scale, white lands between your reds and your yellows and your blues and your purples. So it's cooler than your reds and your yellows, but warmer than your blues and purples. So you could inadvertently be warming up certain focal points that you may not want to, or vice versa. Now, when you use an actual color for your dodging and burning, you instantly know whether or not you're altering the color temperature based on whatever color you have your layer set to. So in short, the result is exactly the same with the solid color fill layer, but it's just much easier to use because you can change the color and your brushwork independent from one another. Okay, so that was my little disclaimer there about that. Now, looking at the burning we just did, it looks okay, but like before over in Lightroom with the range masking, it's pretty flat and muddy because we are burning our lighter tones to the same strength as our darker tones, which really isn't what we need here in order to add texture and contrast. So in order to sculpt this burning a little bit more, we're going to add a luminosity mask to remove this effect from our lighter tones. So let's open up our TK Basic panel to generate some new luminosity masks. Actually, I'm going to turn off this burning layer so luminosity mask is dependent on the original image. I'm going to hit composite, and let's pick a mask that's going to give us a nice selection for our darks. I think the darks too is going to work pretty good here, but I definitely want to strengthen the selection up. I'm going to go image adjustments, brightness. I'm going to bring up the brightness a lot. I want this area up here to be pretty white. You're going to hit OK. Then go over to image adjustments and levels, and let's make this really sharp. Something like that. I'm going to hit OK. I'm going to add a new group and put this burn layer inside of the group. Make sure the group is selected. Go back to the panel and hit apply to add that luminosity mask. And take a look at the before and after. So this, I think, is a big improvement. It's definitely not as muddy. We've gotten some more texture to our dodging and burning, which is great. But definitely think we need to add more texture to the clouds. So we're going to do that by using a curves adjustment layer. Now, in order for this to work inside of the group, we need to add another group and place our burn layer inside of that. So it's easier shown than explained. So let me click on the new group icon. Make sure this group is inside of our master group here that has a luminosity mask. I'm going to take this layer mask that we just created. I'm going to click and drag it so that it applies to the group itself. And make sure that this color fill burn layer is inside of that group. So now any adjustment that we apply to affect this color fill layer is going to be controlled by the painting we just did where we were burning just the sky. Because if we didn't do that and we added a curves adjustment, it's going to affect the entire image. We only want it to affect the sky. So by placing it inside of the group with this mask, it's only going to affect the areas that we've revealed on the layer mask. So new curves adjustment, make sure it's inside of that group here. And I'm going to add a very strong S curve to really bring out the contrast of just the sky. Now, when you're adding a curve, usually you don't want to flatten it out like this. If you do that, you're going to get really muddy, ugly results. So you definitely want to keep an actual curve to your line. Something like this, but you do want to push it probably as much as you can. A very steep S curve. All right, so it's definitely looking better. But I think we can do with a bit more contrast. So we're going to go to a levels adjustment layer. And let's make things a little bit more crunchy. See here up in the histogram that we are missing a lot of highlights here. So I want to add some contrast to that with my levels. Let's bring that down. Bring that in like this. Quick before and after. So we definitely got some more texture here, especially along the tree line. So we brought out some more texture in the sky here. So we do a quick before and after here. You can see this is the original, and here is the after. So not only did we burn this area quite heavily, but we definitely added a lot of texture to the clouds, which is great. And here we can really see the benefit of using a color fill layer. Now when I'm looking at this burning, I could say, you know what, maybe this is a little bit too heavy. All I need to do is double click on it and maybe choose a lighter or darker shade of gray, which makes it really easy to instantly change the color and tone of my dodging and burning without having to redo any of my brush work. So that's a great benefit. Now, being able to change the color of your dodging and burning, it's a much bigger deal when you're working on a color image since we dodge and burn with an actual color, not black and white. So we'll take a look at that in a few minutes. Okay, so before we go any further, you may like to download the dodging and burning cheat sheet. I'll put a download link below this video, but it's basically a Cliff's Notes version of this lesson. It's something that you can reference quickly instead of having to rewatch the entire video here. Now, I outline the step-by-step workflow in both Lightroom and Photoshop. And I've also included, let me scroll down to the bottom here, I've also included very handy keyboard shortcuts on the last 2 pages here. So if you'd like a copy of this, make sure to click the link below this video. And you can either print this out or save it with your other photography resources. Okay, so this is really a global dodging and burning technique, but what if we wanted to do some light painting, which is a local dodging and burning technique? Now, like I did over in the Lightroom lesson, what if I wanted to paint over some of these tree branches here to make them stand out more, to give this tree a more 3-dimensional look? Let's close this group and let's add a new color fill layer, solid color layer. And this time, let's choose a color that's not pure white, but pretty close to it. About 90% or so brightness. Hit OK. I'm going to set this to soft light blend mode. And then invert the mask by pressing Command I. Grab a brush. Use your square bracket keys to continually change the brush size to fit the area that you're dodging. Got my flow set to 10, opacity set to 50%. That's a good setting to start with. But you know what, let me bring my flow up about 25. We can go a little heavy-handed here. And let's just start to paint over some of these tree branches. And again, I'm using my square bracket key to change the size of my brush. Okay, so I've made a few adjustments here. One thing you're probably noticing is that I'm picking up some of the shadows in the background. So this is looking pretty muddy and messy. Now over in Lightroom, you would use your range masking to remove this adjustment from the shadows, but here we can use Luminosity mask, which gives you a little bit more control. Let's go back to the TK panel and let's select a Luminosity mask that is going to give me a nice selection for my highlights. So I'm thinking a Lights 1 is going to work, but I want to darken those shadows a little bit more. So I'm going to go to Image Adjustments Levels, darken up those shadows, brighten up those whites, just give them more contrast. Play with this a little bit, hit OK. I'm going to add a new group. Drag this into the group and apply that luminosity mask. So quick before and after. Before the luminosity mask, and here is the after. So that looks much cleaner and retains the contrast but brightens up the tree branches. We do a before and after the entire adjustment. Since we're using a adjustment layer for our actual dodging, you can just easily duplicate this layer if you want to double up on the effect. Rather than going in and redoing your brush work, it's very easy to just duplicate a layer to strengthen an effect, or you can adjust the opacity of your adjustment layer if the effect is too strong. So this is one of the many benefits of using Photoshop, that it's so easy to tailor your dodging and burning to your image. Okay, let's zoom out to fit screen. All right, so that's going to wrap up a black and white image in Photoshop, but let's work on a color image. Let's do some dodging and burning there to see the different techniques used to address color. Here we are with our color raw file. Now, the workflow is generally the same with a color image as it is with a black and white in Photoshop, but there are some special considerations to keep in mind. Now, as I mentioned over in Lightroom, dodging and burning can have some unwanted side effects on your colors and tones. Specifically working with color, burning can saturate them and dodging can desaturate them. Not only that, but dodging and burning a color image with your grayscale brushes, meaning a black and white brush and then painting onto the mask, which is a typical approach in Photoshop to use black or white brushes, that can make things look very muddy, especially along areas of smooth texture and detail. For example, let's add a 50% gray layer very quickly here. Get a white brush, and let's dodge the foreground a little bit here. See, that dodging here made our colors look very washed out. Removed a lot of that nice green and yellow I had going in the original. It's very flat and uninteresting, and not something you really want when you're trying to dodge a color image. However, let's turn this off for a minute here. Let's add a new solid color adjustment layer, and let's pick a nice bright yellow. Now, when you're dodging, you want to make sure that your brightness is pretty close to 100%, if not 100%, and your saturation is very low. So something like this. Hit OK, set this to soft light, invert the mask, and now let's do the same thing. Okay, look a little better, but actually let's make this a little more yellow. Something like this. Okay, it's still a little bit washed out because we haven't applied a luminosity mask yet, but the overall color is much better than using a white brush here. See how it looks very washed out, but when we do that with a color instead, we're able to retain that warm glow. So this is where the power of color fill layers really come in handy, because often you want to adjust the color of your dodging or burning. For example, later on in our workflow, when we do some color grading, if we added some saturation or change the colors around dramatically, you would want to come back to your dodging and burning and adjust the color of that in order to match what you did later on. For example, at the end of your workflow, you may decide, you know what, this looks a little bit too yellow. I want to shift it more towards orange. You can easily just double click on the layer and make your adjustments as needed. So really quick and easy to do. I'm going to do that right now, and I make this a little bit more orange. Something like that. Hit OK. So now let's add a luminosity mask to this dodge in order to remove it from my darker tones. Because even with the color, it's still a bit washed out. And we lost some good contrast here because we were also dodging the shadows, which is something you generally don't want to do. So I'm going to turn this off for a second. Let's get rid of this practice layer here. Go to my TK Basic panel, hit Composite, let Photoshop make those luminosity masks. And for this, I'm going to go with a Lights 1, but since this foreground is very low in contrast to begin with, we really need to brighten this up and give it a lot of contrast as well. Let's brighten this up considerably. Hit OK, and then go into Image Adjustments Levels, and let's add a lot of contrast as well. Really brighten that up. Something like this. Hit OK. Let's add this adjustment layer to its own group. Turn it back on, and then apply that luminosity mask to the group itself. So quick before and after. For luminosity mask, and here's the after. So you can really see a nice boost in the contrast there. Then we turn the entire adjustment on and off. So we managed to dodge the foreground really nicely without losing contrast or saturation. And of course, if the luminosity mask is a little bit too restrictive, you can always click on the mask itself, and under the properties panel, you can adjust the density to lighten up on how restricted this luminosity mask actually is. And when you make any kind of adjustment under the properties panel to a layer mask, it's non-destructive. So you can always come back later and make the mask stronger again if you want. One thing I really like to use with the layer mask is the feather slider. Now and then, take a look at the luminosity mask here. Now and then the selection could be a little bit too harsh and give your image some pixelation. Now the typical approach would be to add some Gaussian blur, or just any kind of blur, to the mask itself, but what's often overlooked is that under the properties panel, you can't adjust the feathering right here. That's a little bit too much, but if you ever wanted to soften the effect of whatever your mask is doing, you can do it non-destructively with the feather slider. So you never have to worry about permanently blurring out your mask. Now for this dodge, we used a similar color to match the area we're working on, the grass and the yellow flowers here. But you can also use a dissimilar color to gently shift the temperature while you are dodging at the same time. So with this image here, if I wanted to cool down the foreground, I could double click on the solid color fill layer and then maybe pick something more towards purple and blue. Now it really doesn't work for this image, but in other photos, this can work very well, especially when combined with a luminosity mask so that you are shifting the colors of only certain tonal groups. So I'll cancel out of this. Now, another great thing about this workflow is that you're not restricted to a specific area of your frame. So right now we dodged the foreground flowers, but if I also wanted to dodge the sunward facing side of this little cabin here, I can do that with the same layer. I'm going to take a white brush. You bring the opacity down to about 30%, flow down a little bit more, and just paint this side of the cabin here, very lightly. Don't have to go too heavy here. Take a look at our layer mask so we can see what we're doing. Now it looks like a good amount. And you could even paint a little bit more. Let me zoom out a little bit. See the before and after. See, they added a nice little sun glow to that side of the cabin. Actually looking at it, that's a little bit too heavy, so we're going to switch the foreground color to black. And then just paint over this a couple times to scale back on that. Okay, now let's go back over to white and zoom out to fit. So we've got a white brush. Let's just enhance some of the sun around the horizon line as well. Just add a nice warm glow to this entire area. The tree line, a little bit of the sky. Quick before and after. See, it's already looking much better. You can also use the same adjustment to do a little bit of highlight painting if you wanted to get really specific with your dodging and burning here. Now this would take a while to do, but once you zoom out and look at the entire image, it makes a huge improvement. So I got the white brush. Let me bring the flow up to about 30 so we can get a strong adjustment here. And you just want to go over your existing highlights just to strengthen them, and it'll give this tree line a more three-dimensional appearance. Use a smaller brush here. Move over a little bit, do the same thing here. Just try to go over the existing highlights and make them a little bit brighter and warmer. Holding down the space bar in order to move around my canvas without having to zoom out and zoom back in again. If I hold down the space bar, it turns to a hand. You can click and drag your image around. Works the same way over in Lightroom as well. Okay, it's just a nice way to add more texture. And again, this isn't going to be for everybody, but it does pay off. Quick before and after. See how much better that looks? Okay, let's go back to fit screen and move on to our next adjustment. Okay, so that's enough on dodging. Now let's add a new group so we can start with our burning. So I've added a new group. I'm going to add a new solid color adjustment layer. And now for the dodging, we picked a color that was very high in brightness and pretty low in saturation. And we're going to basically do the same thing for our burning, except we're going to pick a color that's pretty low in saturation. Now, since I'm going to be burning the sky here, I want to select a color. It's going to complement that well. So something in the blue-purple range, right around here. Now when you're selecting a color for your burning, you want to be around 10 to 20% brightness to start, and then you can adjust it to taste later on. So something right around here. Still want to be low in saturation, not so that it's gray, but somewhere right around here. Just a little bit of color. Gonna hit OK, gonna change this to overlay blend mode and invert the layer mask. Gonna grab a white brush, bring it up fairly large, get my opacity at around 30%, keep flow around 30 as well. I'm just gonna start painting over areas that I want to burn. Okay, that's a little bit too heavy on the flow. I'm gonna back up, bring that down to about 15. Let's cut this in half. And that's looking a little bit better. A little more tapered out. I'm just really going over the clouds here to gently push more attention towards the middle of the frame. So nothing too crazy, just a little bit of burning. One thing I'm noticing, so I'm starting to get some weird color banding going on right here. So I'm going to switch back to a black brush and remove some of this burning just from this area right here. Okay, that's looking much better. Now, one of the big issues when you burn in any image is that you don't want to burn your highlights because it really flattens out the contrast and just makes your image look muddy. So I know we have this problem over in Lightroom, but in Photoshop, what we're going to do here is add a luminosity mask to remove this burning from our highlights. So let's open up the TK panel and select a darks luminosity mask. Let's try a darks 2. That's looking pretty good, but I want to strengthen this up a little bit. I'm going to go up to image adjustments, brightness, add a little bit of brightness, and then add a little bit of contrast as well with my levels. Now if this contrast is too sharp, I can always soften it by increasing the feathering of the layer mask under the properties panel. So I'm going to hit OK, make sure my group is selected, going back to the TK panel and select apply to apply that luminosity mask to our burning. Quick before and after, before the mask, and after the mask. So a much cleaner result. And if we turn the burning on and off, so you now have a very light vignette effect, pushing more attention towards the center of the image. And since we're using a color fill layer, if you think that this color is a little bit too purpley, double click on it and maybe adjust it more towards blue. Something more like that. I think that actually looks a little bit better. So for the next adjustment, we're going to take a curves adjustment layer and dodge the white parts of this cabin here. I'm noticing that they look a little bit muddy and washed out, so I want to bring back some of those whiter parts. So let me zoom out to fit so I can show you how this all works. Now if you remember early in the tutorial, what we did is, let's take a look at the layer mask. We used that solid color fill layer to dodge both the foreground in that cabin and a little bit of the sky here. So it's all under one layer mask. However, when I look at the image itself and zoom into the cabin, you can kind of tell that the hue is a little off. It's a little too yellow. I think this area at least should be shifted more towards red, which will help get rid of some of those muddy tones. Now I really can't change the color here because I've already applied my mask to a specific color that is also being used to dodge the foreground. So if I change the color, it's going to affect the foreground as well, which is something I don't want. So how do we change the color of my brushwork here without having to delete it from our layer mask and reapply it to another solid color layer? This is where curves come in, since you can change the hue as well as the brightness of very specific areas. So let's add a curves adjustment layer. And I'm going to hold down the option key in order to clip it to this color layer. And of course you want to make sure that it's inside of the group here with the luminosity mask, making sure that our adjustments aren't being applied to the shadows. So next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to invert this layer mask so it's black. I'm going to take a white brush at full opacity and full flow. I'm going to press the backslash key in order to turn on my overlay here, and I'm just going to paint over this side of the shack. Now you don't have to get 100% perfect with your brushwork here, but do try to follow the lines. So alright, that's looking pretty good. I'm going to click on the curves adjustment layer, then go into the properties panel, into the red channel, and let's bring this up considerably, just to add a little bit more red to this area. Should maybe bring up a little bit more. Okay, quick before and after. That looks much better for that side of the shack that's facing the sun. Now speaking of curves, I have another use for them in dodge and burning that I really want to show you. A great thing about this workflow is when you use adjustment layers with groups and luminosity masks, when you have this environment set up, you can tackle pretty much any kind of adjustment you need to very easily, and most importantly, it's non-destructive. For example, I'm looking at this cabin here and I'm noticing that the whites are still looking a bit muddy and they're not cohesive with the bright sunlight we just added. But I still think we can bring these whites out, make them brighter, and give this cabin more of a three-dimensional appearance. However, if we add another color fill layer and dodge it with white, it's not going to be strong enough to brighten up these whites, I think. So instead what I'm going to do is use a curves adjustment layer to brighten up the white paint. So the first step here is to grab a luminosity mask. It's going to give me a nice selection for my highlights. So for this adjustment, I'm going to select a lights 2 and then tailor it a little bit by adding some brightness. Okay, that looks good. And then I'm going to add some contrast with my levels adjustment. Get a real sharp selection here. So something like this is going to look good. I'm going to hit OK. We go up to the top here. We're going to add a new group. Let me close this out. Add a new group and then go back to the panel and select a curves adjustment layer. And that layer mask is going to be applied to it. Now, the way this environment is set up right now, if I make any adjustment to my curves, it's going to affect the entire image. So what I can do is repurpose the mask I just created down here, which we painted over the sunward facing side of this little cabin. I'm just going to hold down the Option key, click and drag so that it's over my new group. I'm going to release, and that layer mask has now been applied to that group. So a little time-saving tip there is that you can repurpose existing layer masks simply by copying them. Okay, now I can go into my curves adjustment and really brighten up those whites. And since I'm using a luminosity mask here, let's take a look at it. I'm using a luminosity mask that is very strong, high contrast, and it's just selecting the whites, which is exactly what I'm looking for. So when I make that adjustment, you can see it's only changing the whites and really cleaning this up nicely. Now if we zoom into this area, you may notice that this adjustment might be a little bit too pixelated. So if that's the case, you can click on the layer mask, the luminosity mask, and then adjust the feathering to maybe soften it up a little. Not too much. You really don't want to go too far, or you're going to get a very washed out effect with halos, and you don't want that. Usually stick around like 0.4, 0.6 if things are looking a bit too crunchy. So quick before and after. That's looking much better. It's pretty easy to create because we already have existing masks to work with. We created the luminosity mask within 10 seconds and then repurposed that other layer mask so that we are only affecting this side of the cabin. And with this environment, you can very easily apply it to other areas as well, other whites that you want to brighten up. For example, I can paint this over more of the Coca-Cola sign here, or I can even brighten up some of these whites as well. And of course, since I have my luminosity mask control and everything, I don't have to worry about painting outside the lines or pulling in any other tones to this adjustment other than my bright highlights. So it's a really nice environment to work in, because once you set it up, it's just so easy to make your adjustments. And of course, since we're using groups and mask and adjustment layers, you can do all of the great things that you can do with a regular layer. You can move them around, you can temporarily hide them if you need to. You can adjust the strength of either the adjustment layer with the opacity slider or adjust the opacity of the entire group itself. If you have multiple layers within a group, you can adjust the strength like that. So there are a lot of great things you can do here that would be a lot more difficult to do with a regular dodge and burn layer, that 50% gray layer we talked about earlier in the video. Okay, so that's looking pretty good, but one more adjustment I want to do before we wrap up this video is I want to warm up the center of the image. I want to pull a little bit more attention towards the middle. I'm just looking at it and it appears a little bit cold. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a new dodge layer by selecting solid color. I'm going to move this more towards orange. I'm going to select a very light, almost like a peachy orange like this. I'm going to hit OK. Make sure this is at the top of our layers. Switch it to soft light. Invert my mask to hide it. I'm going to take a white brush, set to, I don't know, do 30 flow and 30 opacity to start. Somewhere in there. I'm just going to very lightly paint over the center of the image. Like this. This is giving it a nice warm summer glow. Good before and after. But as I mentioned before, this is also dodging our shadows, which is something you generally don't want. So let's grab a luminosity mask really quick here to remove this adjustment from our shadows. I'm thinking of lights 1 and strengthen it up just a little bit. I'm going to add some more contrast here. Okay, and then apply it to the group. Quick before and after that luminosity mask. Looking much better. Definitely not washed out anymore. And if we do before and after that quick adjustment, you can see it just brightens everything up Gives it more of a warm, glowy atmosphere. Okay, so let's do a quick before and after. This is the original image that I brought over from Lightroom. The original DNG file that I merged 3 different exposures together using the HDR feature over in Lightroom. And here is the after. So not a huge difference. It's not as dramatic as some of the other images we'll be processing, but not every image needs a huge dramatic shift. Sometimes the image is good enough on its own and you just want to give it very light improvements. So the original here, it was pretty good, but the cabin was looking a bit muted and dull and uninteresting and just has an overall cold appearance. However, when we made a few minor shifts, I think it's warmed up the image really nicely. And don't forget to download the Dodging and Burning cheat sheet by clicking the link below this video. This will give you a quick summary and reference of this entire lesson, as well as some workflow tips to help you implement this lesson more quickly with your own photography. And down at the end here, I have some very handy keyboard shortcuts of the tools you will most frequently use when dodging and burning. People seem to really like these cheat sheets, so I hope you find this helpful, and if you like a copy, just click the link right below this video. Alright, that's going to do it for this video. Thanks so much for joining me, and I will see you in the next one.